William Carter slammed his fist on the kitchen table so hard the coffee cups rattled, and his daughter flinched from across the room. "You brought him here," he said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than a shout. "You brought that man to my door and let him ask me that." Clara didn't look away. She stood straight the way her mother had taught her, and she said, "I didn't bring him, Papa. He came on his own. That's the difference." If this story moves you, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. And when you're done watching, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. Colorado Territory, November 1878. William Carter was 53 years old, and he was dying, though he hadn't told a soul. He felt it in the way a man who has worked the land his whole life feels the first hard frost coming, not with panic, but with a cold, quiet certainty that settles somewhere behind the ribs and doesn't leave. The cough had started in August. By October, it was waking him before dawn, and by November, he was pressing a cloth to his mouth in the barn so Clara wouldn't hear him through the kitchen window. He had one daughter. One piece of the world that mattered to him more than the ranch, more than the cattle, more than the 700 acres his own father had bled to build. Clara was 22 years old, with her mother's dark eyes, and her mother's way of looking at a man like she could see clean through the front of him to whatever was hiding in the back. Margaret had been gone 6 years now. And in those 6 years, William had made himself one promise he intended to keep above all others. Clara would not end up alone. He had done everything a father could reasonably do. He had allowed 3 different men from town to come courting. Franklin Aldridge, whose father owned the lumber mill, and who arrived with a new suit every single time he visited, like he was trying to convince William the suit came with the man. Then there was Dr. Harmon's boy Philip, who was polite enough but had soft hands and a habit of looking at his own reflection in the window glass when he thought nobody was watching. And then there was Nathan Whitmore. Nathan was the one who concerned William most, not because he was the worst man among them, but because he was the most dangerous kind of man there is. Handsome enough, educated enough, rich enough, and smart enough to know which parts of himself to hide during a courtship call. His father, Douglas Whitmore, ran the largest cattle operation in the county and had his name on half the deeds in town. Nathan had grown up knowing that money solved problems, and he had never yet encountered a problem it couldn't. He wanted Clara the way a man wants a fine horse, because she would reflect well on him, and because the wanting itself felt good. William had seen that look before. He had seen it in men who collected things. Clara had refused all 3 of them. Politely the first time, firmly the second. And the third time Nathan came with a ring box and a speech he had clearly practiced, she had simply said, "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate your persistence, but my answer is the same as it was, and it will be the same next time too." Then she had walked back into the house and resumed shelling beans like it was the most ordinary Tuesday afternoon of her life. William had watched the whole thing from the porch, and he hadn't known whether to laugh or despair. He was still trying to figure that out when Elias Walker rode onto his property on a gray Wednesday morning at the end of October. William was in the yard splitting wood when he heard the horse. He set down his axe and turned to look. The man riding toward him was not what you would call impressive at first glance. Medium height, lean the way men get when they work hard, and eat plain with dark hair pushed back under a hat that had seen better years. His coat was worn at the elbows. His boots were resoled at least twice over. The horse beneath him was old but well cared for, which William noted without meaning to a man who keeps up an old horse when he could let it go, tells you something. The man stopped about 15 feet out and climbed down easy without hurry. He tied the horse to the fence post, not to the hitching rail closer to the porch, which William also noted. He was keeping his distance until invited. That told you something too. "Mr. Carter," the man said. "That's right," William said. He didn't reach out to shake hands yet. "And you are?" "Elias Walker. I've been working timber up on the North Ridge for the past 2 seasons. Before that, I was running trap lines in the high country." He paused. "I've seen your daughter in town a few times." William felt his jaw set. "A lot of men have seen my daughter in town. Yes, sir. Elias looked at him directly. Not aggressive, not nervous either. Just steady the way a man looks when he's already decided something, and is now just waiting for the world to catch up. I'd like to speak with her, with your permission. With my permission, William repeated. Yes, sir. William picked up his axe again, not because he intended to use it, but because he needed something to do with his hands. Son, I've had men come to this ranch with leather satchels full of banknotes and a lawyer standing ready to draw up papers. I've had men come with jewelry from the city, and men come with letters of recommendation from men I actually respect. You have ridden up here on a horse that is older than my barn, wearing a coat that wouldn't fetch 50 cents at a church rummage sale. And you want to talk to my daughter. That's correct, Elias said. He didn't blink. You got land? No, sir. Savings? Some, not much. Family money? No, sir. My father was a miner. He didn't leave much. William looked at him for a long moment. Then, what exactly are you proposing to offer her? Elias was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man searching for an answer, but the quiet of a man deciding which truth to lead with. Myself, he said. My time, my work, my word. He glanced down at his hands briefly, then back up. I know that doesn't sound like much standing here in daylight next to what other men have offered, but I've watched those men too, Mr. Carter, and I think you've watched them the same way I have. William said nothing. I'm not here to tell you I'm better than them, Elias continued. I'm here to ask if I can let your daughter decide that for herself. William walked to the fence and leaned against it. He looked out at the range for a while, at the cattle moving slow in the distance, at the sky, coming in low and gray from the northwest, with the particular color that meant snow before nightfall. He thought about Clara in the house behind him, probably already aware someone had ridden in, probably already standing slightly back from the window, the way her mother used to do. She know you're here? He asked. I told her I intended to come. And what did she say? Elias almost smiled, just barely. She said I was free to make my own decisions. William grunted. That was Clara all right. He turned back to look at Elias Walker, and tried to find the flaw in the man quickly, the way he'd learned to find flaws in horses and land deals and men who came to him with offers. Shifty eyes meant one thing. Too much eagerness meant another. A man who talked about himself too much was hiding something. A man who talked too little was hiding more. Elias Walker looked back at him plain and even, and William couldn't find a crack to put his finger in. You got somewhere to be? William asked finally. No, sir. Then put your horse in the second stall. You'll take supper with us tonight, and you'll sleep in the bunkhouse. Tomorrow morning you'll start work at first light. You'll work for no pay and no promises. And at the end of it, however long it takes, I'll decide whether you've earned the right to call on my daughter properly. He picked up his axe again. That agreeable to you? Elias Walker nodded once. Yes, sir. It is. He led his horse toward the barn, without another word, and William watched him go, and thought that he had probably just made a decision he couldn't take back. He was right about that. Clara came out onto the porch about 10 minutes later. She stood beside her father and looked toward the barn. He came, she said. He came? William agreed. What did you tell him? I told him to put his horse up and get ready for supper. Clara was quiet a moment. Then, that's not a no. It's not a yes either, William said. It's a wait and see. Clara nodded. She went back inside without another word, which was exactly what her mother would have done, and William stood there looking at the barn for a long time, and tried to remember the last time anything had surprised him. That first night at supper, Elias Walker said very little. He ate what was on his plate. He helped Clara clear the dishes without being asked, and he thanked her quietly when she refilled his coffee. He didn't try to be charming. He didn't try to make William like him. He answered questions when asked, and didn't manufacture reasons to talk when he wasn't. Nathan Whitmore, when he came to supper, talked for 45 minutes about a land deal his father had just closed in Denver. The difference settled somewhere in William's chest and stayed there. The work started before dawn the next morning. William had spent 30 years running a cattle ranch through drought and hard winters and market collapses, and he knew exactly how much labor it took to hold a spread together. He knew which jobs a man would do willingly because they needed doing, and which jobs a man would find excuses to delay because they were unpleasant and thankless, and nobody would notice if he left them for tomorrow. He assigned Elias Walker the second kind. The fence line on the north end of the property had been sagging for 2 seasons. 50 yards of rotted posts that needed pulling and replacing in ground that had frozen hard 2 weeks ago. It was the kind of work that punished your back and your hands and your patience simultaneously, and it produced nothing that looked impressive from a distance. It was just necessary work that had been put off too long. Elias Walker started on it before William was even finished with the morning milking. He didn't ask for tools. He found them in the shed. He didn't ask which posts to start with. He started at the worst end and worked toward the better. William went out mid-morning on the excuse of checking the cattle and found him 2/3 of the way through the line with his coat off, despite the cold, working with the focused, unshowy efficiency of a man who had been doing hard labor since boyhood. "Didn't expect you to the end of that line before noon," William said. Elias looked up. His breath came out in clouds. There was a cut across his left hand he hadn't bothered to wrap. "Ground's harder than I thought in the middle section," he said, "but I'll have it finished." "You should wrap that hand." "I will when I'm done with this post." William looked at the post he was working on, solid and straight in its new hole. Then he looked down the line at the ones already done. Every one of them was set at the same depth, tamped firm, with the wires stretched even. It wasn't the work of a man trying to impress someone. It was the work of a man who couldn't do a job halfway. He went back to the house without saying anything else. He told himself he wasn't impressed. He believed himself until about 4 in the afternoon, when he saw Elias quietly and without any fanfare whatsoever go to the feed barn, fill the water trough that Clara usually managed before supper, and then carry an armload of firewood to the side door of the house because the pile there had run low. Clara was at the window. She saw it too. She didn't say anything. She turned back to her bread dough and kept working. But William saw what was on her face before she turned, and it was not the polite tolerance she showed Nathan Whitmore. It was something quieter. Something that frightened him a little. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, Nathan Whitmore's buggy came up the lane with its brass fittings, catching what was left of the pale autumn light. Nathan stepped down in a coat that cost more than Elias Walker probably made in a season, and he saw the mountain man coming out of the barn, and every easy pleasantness left his face at once. "Carter," he said without looking away from Elias. "Who is that hired hand?" William said, which was not quite a lie and not quite the truth. Nathan looked at him working. Then he looked back at William. "Word in town is that man has been asking around about Clara." "Men ask things," William said. "Men with something to offer, maybe." Nathan's voice had a particular tone to it that William recognized the tone of a man who had never been told no by anyone with real power and was only barely managing his reaction to the possibility. "That man has nothing. Less than nothing. He doesn't even have a proper claim. He has 2 good hands and a fence line that's straighter than the one my hired crew put in 3 years ago," William said. Nathan looked at him. "I'm not saying anything," William added. "I'm just saying what I see." Nathan went inside to find Clara, who received him in the front room, with the same careful courtesy she always managed, polite as a church door and about as welcoming as one on a Monday. She offered him coffee. She answered his questions. She did not smile at him once in the 40 minutes he sat there. And when he finally left, he had to know it, though he was the kind of man who found ways to not know things that were inconvenient. On his way to his buggy, he passed close to where Elias was stacking split wood near the house, and he stopped. "You know this is pointless," Nathan said, low enough that the words didn't carry far. "Whatever you think you're doing here." Elias set a piece of wood down carefully. He looked at Nathan Whitmore, the way a man looks at weather he doesn't like but can't change without excitement, without fear, just taking note of it. "I'm stacking wood," Elias said, "because the lady of this house will need it tonight." "She's not your lady," Nathan said. "She's not anybody's lady but her own," Elias answered. "That's the part you keep missing." Nathan's face changed. Something moved through it, something cold and calculating that the pleasant surface didn't quite cover anymore. He straightened his coat and walked to his buggy and didn't look back. That night at supper, William watched his daughter. She passed the biscuits to Elias without being asked, because she had noticed he'd taken the last one rather than reach across her. She refilled his coffee while she was refilling her father's, a small ordinary thing that meant nothing by itself. But it was the third such small ordinary thing William had observed, and small ordinary things were what a life was actually made of when you stripped away the fancy gestures and the Sunday suits. "He going to keep coming around?" Elias asked. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at William. "Whitmore," William said. "Probably. His family has a claim on the feed contract your neighbor Haskell uses," Elias said. "And the water rights on the East Fork run through Whitmore land now. That happened this past summer when old Greer sold his place." William set his fork down. "How do you know that?" "I pay attention," Elias said simply. "When something matters to me, I pay attention to what's around it." William looked at him for a long moment. "Why does this ranch matter to you?" he asked, because that was really what he was asking. Not about water rights, not about Nathan Whitmore. He was asking the question he'd been circling since Wednesday morning. Elias glanced at Clara once, and then back at William, and he answered the question honestly, which was its own kind of courage. "Because she does," he said. "And if she matters, then what protects her matters, and what threatens her matters." He picked up his coffee cup. "I'm not trying to buy my way in, Mr. Carter. I know I can't do that. I'm trying to understand what I'm walking into so I can be useful instead of just willing." The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Clara was looking at the table. Her expression was something William couldn't quite name. Not happiness, exactly, more like recognition. The look of a person who has been waiting to hear something said correctly and had almost given up. William picked up his fork again. "Pass me one of those biscuits," he said to nobody in particular. And Elias Walker passed them without a word. And the evening went on. And outside, the first snow of the season began coming down soft and steady over the Colorado Territory, the way it always did, without warning and without apology. Just the way life had always come, not when you were ready, but when it was ready for you. William went to bed that night with the cough worse than usual, pressing the cloth to his mouth in the dark, thinking about a man who had ridden up on an old horse with worn boots and no deed and no fortune, and who had looked him in the eye and said, "When something matters to me, I pay attention to what's around it." He thought about Nathan Whitmore with his water rights and his feed contracts and his cold, calculating face, and he thought about his daughter standing straight the way her mother had taught her. And somewhere in the dark, in the space between one cough and the next, William Carter made a decision he hadn't admitted to himself yet. He was going to find out exactly who Elias Walker was. Because something in him, something old and weary and honest, already suspected he knew. The snow that fell the night Elias Walker passed the biscuits didn't melt for 4 days. William noticed that Elias didn't treat the snow as an excuse. Every other hand he'd employed over the years, and there had been plenty of them drifters, mostly men who worked well enough in good weather and found reasons to disappear when conditions turned, would have slowed down when the temperature dropped. Elias Walker sped up, not frantically, not to show off, just with the quiet urgency of a man who understood that when conditions got harder, the work didn't wait. He was in the barn before William was awake on that first snow morning, and William knew it because he could hear him through the wall of the house. The particular rhythm of a man moving with purpose in a cold space boot heels on hard ground, the low murmur of someone talking to a nervous animal, the scrape of a shovel clearing ice from the water trough. William lay in the dark and listened to it, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something close to relief, though he wasn't ready to call it that yet. Clara heard it too. She was up before her father, which was unusual. She had coffee made by the time William came downstairs, and she handed him his cup without looking at him, which meant she was thinking about something she didn't want him to see on her face. "He's been out there since before light," she said. "I know," William said. "He didn't have to do that." "No," William agreed. "He didn't." She wrapped her hands around her own cup and looked out the window toward the barn. "Papa." "Don't," William said. Not unkindly, just honestly. "Not yet. Let me watch a while longer." Clara looked at him, her mother's eyes measuring him the way her mother always had. "How long?" she asked. William drank his coffee. "Long enough to be sure," he said. "That's all. Long enough to be sure." She accepted that. She always had known when pushing wouldn't help, which was another thing she'd gotten from her mother, and William was grateful for it every single time. The question was sure of what exactly. That was what William turned over in his mind all through that snow-heavy morning while he went about his own work. He had seen plenty of men work hard. Hard work alone didn't make a man trustworthy. He had seen men who were generous in the early weeks of a courtship and showed you their true accounting later when the newness wore off and comfort set in. He had seen men who were kind to women and cruel to animals, which was the oldest signal there was. He had seen men who were good workers and terrible husbands because the qualities that make a man useful on a ranch don't automatically transfer to the harder labor of a marriage. What he was watching for was harder to name than any of those individual things. He was watching for the place where Elias Walker's character leaked through despite itself. That happened for the first time around 10 o'clock that morning when one of the older cows, a 16-year-old longhorn cross named Dolly, whom William had owned for most of her life and had been planning to sell before winter got her back leg caught in a gap in the fence that should have been repaired last spring and wasn't. She had gone down trying to free herself, and by the time William got to her, she was on her side in the snow, eyes wild, breath coming hard. "Leave her," his neighbor Haskell would have said. "She's too old, not worth the trouble." Elias was already there when William arrived, crouched down near her head, one hand on her neck, talking to her low and steady, the way you talk to something frightened, not to explain anything, because she couldn't understand explanations, but just to give her a sound that wasn't pain, something continuous and calm. William watched him for a moment without speaking. "Leg's not broken," Elias said without looking up. "She's twisted in the wire, but it's not cut deep. We can get her out." "It'll take two of us," William said. "That's why I waited," Elias said. "It took them 40 minutes. Dolly fought them twice, which you couldn't blame her for, and Elias took a kick to the ribs on the second round that knocked the air out of him. He doubled over against the fence and stayed there for about 30 seconds, hand pressed to his side. William watched him, and Elias did not curse, did not blame the animal, did not suggest giving up. He just breathed. Then he straightened up and went back to the same quiet work, crouching down beside her again, like nothing had interrupted him. When they finally got her up and free, Elias stayed with her for another 15 minutes, just making sure she steadied, before they walked her back to the barn. He didn't need to do that. She was old. She was out, the job was technically done. But he stayed. William went to check the water situation and came back, and Elias was still there, one hand resting lightly on Dolly's neck, watching her breathe even out. "She'll do," Elias said. "She'll do," William agreed. He paused. "That kick catch you bad?" Elias shrugged with one shoulder. "Bruised maybe, nothing worse." "You should let Clara look at it." There was a half-second of something not quite self-consciousness, but awareness. Then Elias said, "I'll be fine." "I didn't ask if you'd be fine," William said. "I said let Clara look at it. She's got a good hand with that kind of thing." Elias looked at him. Something shifted in the air between them, the smallest thing, a door not quite opened, but no longer locked. "All right," he said. "If you think it's necessary." "I think it's practical," William said. And he walked out of the barn, and for a long moment he stood outside in the cold, with the snow coming off the roof in small slides, and thought about the fact that he had just sent that man into his kitchen to his daughter deliberately, and realized he didn't regret it. That was the first crack in what he'd been telling himself. Inside the house, he could hear their voices through the wall when he came back to the porch. Clara's brisk and practical, asking him to sit down, stop being difficult, take the coat off so she could see properly. Elias's lower, complying without complaint. Then Clara saying something he couldn't hear, and a short, real laugh from Elias Walker. Not performed, not polite, just genuine. A sound that had no audience in it. The kind of laugh that only comes out when a person isn't thinking about how they sound. William sat down on the porch in the cold, and listened to his daughter laugh back, and felt the ground shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. He didn't go inside for another 20 minutes. Nathan Whitmore came back 3 days later. He arrived in the late afternoon, which was different from his usual morning visits, and he had a man with him this time, not a friend, but the kind of company a man brings when he wants to make a point. Older, heavyset, with the particular bearing of someone who works in an office and considers that fact a mark of distinction. He introduced himself as Mr. Gerald Crane, his father's business attorney. William met them in the yard. He did not invite them onto the porch. "Mr. Carter," Nathan said, with the careful pleasantness of a man holding something behind his back. "Good to see you. I've asked Mr. Crane to come along because there are some business matters I thought we might discuss. Matters that affect your property." William looked at Gerald Crane. Gerald Crane looked back at him with the mild, patient expression of a man who has delivered unpleasant news so many times that it no longer registers as personal. "What matters?" William said. Nathan clasped his hands together in front of him. "My father has recently acquired the outstanding note on a small loan your ranch carries with the First Territorial Bank. It was a routine business transaction the bank needed to liquidate certain holdings, and my father was in a position to purchase them." He paused. "He has no intention of pressing the matter immediately, of course. He simply thought you should be aware." William was very still. The loan Nathan was referring to was 3 years old. $240 borrowed during a bad spring when 3 of his best breeding cows had died in a flood and he'd needed to restock. He'd been paying it down steadily. There were 2 more payments before it cleared. 2 more payments. "That's a legal transaction," William said. His voice was level. "Entirely." Nathan agreed. "Entirely legal. And as I said, there's no immediate pressure. We simply wanted you to be informed." He looked toward the barn where Elias was visible in the doorway watching. "I see your hired hand is still with you." "He is," William said. Nathan looked back at him. The pleasantness in his face was still there, but it was thinner now. The way ice goes thin in late winter, you can see it, but you don't trust your weight to it. "A man in your situation," he said carefully, "might want to give some thought to the kinds of alliances he cultivates. Business alliances, family alliances." He let that sit for a moment. "My father is a generous man when he's treated as a partner." "And when he's not," William said. Nathan smiled. "He's a practical man, that's all." They left without coming inside. William stood in the yard and watched the buggy go, and didn't move for a long time. Elias came and stood beside him. He didn't say anything immediately, which William had come to recognize as his way. He never filled silence with noise. "You heard that," William said. "It wasn't a question." "Enough of it," Elias said. "2 more payments," William said. "That's all that's left on that note. $200 roughly." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does the note say about terms of transfer?" William turned and looked at him. "Why?" "Because sometimes when a note transfers, the terms change. Sometimes they accelerate. If Whitmore's father bought it specifically to use as leverage, he may have already renegotiated the schedule with the bank before completing the purchase." Elias met his eyes. "You need to see the actual paperwork, not what they told you, the actual document." William stared at him. "How do you know that? I've been on the wrong end of land transactions before," Elias said. "Not my land, my father's. Different state, same playbook." His jaw tightened slightly, the first real tension William had seen cross his face. We lost the claim when the terms accelerated, and we couldn't meet the new schedule in time. The company had planned it that way from the beginning. The weight of what he was saying landed hard. William understood the mechanics because he had seen men lose land this way, not through direct theft, but through paperwork, through timing, through the small print that men like Gerald Crane understood, and men like William Carter had never needed to understand, because they had trusted the institutions that were supposed to protect them. "You know someone who can read that document," William said. Elias looked at him steadily. "I know someone who can do more than read it," he said. "But that's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight you need to get a copy of what you signed 3 years ago and read every line of it." William nodded once. Then he said, "You've been thinking about this." "Since Whitmore's first visit," Elias said. "When you told me about the water rights on the East Fork, I started thinking about it then. Before you even knew about the loan, before I knew the specific," Elias said. "But I knew the shape of it. Men like Nathan Whitmore don't pursue what they can't eventually own. And when they can't own a woman outright, they start working on the things around her." The bluntness of it stopped William for a moment. Not because it offended him, because it was exactly right, and he had been too close to it to see the shape as clearly as this man had, this man who had ridden up with worn boots and nothing in his bag, and who had apparently been 3 steps ahead of this situation since before William had fully registered it. He looked at Elias Walker in the fading afternoon and tried once more to find the flaw in him, the crack, the thing that would let him breathe easier about what was happening to his daughter's heart. He didn't find it. "Come inside," William said. "I'll find those papers." That night, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, William, Clara, and Elias going through documents by lamplight. Clara had known about the loan because Clara knew about everything that affected the ranch, and she had not reacted to the news about Whitmore's father with fear. She had reacted with anger, which was colder and more useful. "He can't do this legally," she said on her 3rd reading of the original note. "He may have already adjusted what's legal," Elias said. He was reading carefully without rushing. "The original terms give a 30-day window for transfer notification to the borrower. Did you receive any notification from the bank?" William thought about it. "There was a letter," he said slowly. 3 weeks ago. I thought it was a routine statement. I put it in the desk." Clara got up and went to the desk in the next room. She came back with the letter. She read it. Her face changed. "The repayment schedule has been accelerated," she said. Her voice was flat and careful. "Full balance due in 60 days. Silence in the kitchen. "From what date?" Elias said. "From the date of the letter." Elias calculated without speaking for a moment. "That gives you roughly 40 days from today." William pressed his hands flat on the table and looked at them. $240 in 40 days was not an impossible sum for a working ranch. But it was also not a sum he could produce without strain. Not this time of year, not before the spring cattle sale, not without selling something he couldn't easily replace. Nathan Whitmore's father had timed it perfectly, and he had almost certainly known it. "We need to talk about the mining trail," Elias said. Both William and Clara looked at him. "What mining trail?" Clara asked. Elias sat back slightly. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man deciding how much to say and in what order. William watched him and didn't rush him. 4 years ago, Elias began, I was running traps in the high country northeast of Greer's Ridge. Storm came in fast, worse than expected, and I took shelter in a cut in the rock that I'd used before. While I was waiting it out, I found the remains of an old campsite, not recent, maybe 20 years old. There were tools, assay equipment, and there was a partial map, damaged but readable, showing a secondary drift off an abandoned silver vein that the original survey had missed. He paused. The site itself is maybe 2 days' ride into the high country. The original mining operation folded before they ever reached it. What's in that drift, if the map's accurate, is enough to clear your note 3 times over. Maybe more. Clara looked at her father. Her father looked at Elias. You've known this for 4 years, William said slowly, and you never went after it yourself. I went once, Elias said. First winter after I found the map. Made it most of the way. Then the weather turned bad, and I had to come back. I lost 2 horses, and nearly didn't make it home myself. His eyes were steady, but not casual. He was not minimizing what he was saying. It's not a safe journey. It's genuinely dangerous country in winter. But you kept the map, Clara said. I kept the map, he said. Why are you telling us now? She asked. She was watching him with those direct measuring eyes, and Elias Walker didn't flinch from them. Because this is the moment that requires it, he said simply. I didn't come here to talk about mining rights or family loans. I came here because of you. But what's good for you, and what protects this ranch, happen to be the same thing right now, and I'm not going to hold back information that could help your family, because I'm worried about how it makes me look. Clara sat with that for a moment. Then she said quietly, You were saving that, for the right moment. No, Elias said. He shook his head once. I wasn't saving it for anything. I was living with it. There's a difference. Clara looked at him for a long time. William watched her look, and he recognized the expression on her face, because he had seen it only once before in his life. Margaret had worn it the first time she'd looked at him with that particular kind of attention, not admiration, not attraction, but assessment. The look of a careful person in the moment they decide whether to trust. It was the most important look in the world, and it terrified him, and he was glad she was giving it. All right, William said, pulling them both back to the table. How do we do this? They talked until after midnight. Elias laid out what he knew about the route, the landmarks, the risks, the 2 points where the trail became genuinely impassable under heavy snow. He was honest about what he didn't know, and didn't try to smooth over the dangers. Clara asked practical questions, the kind of questions that told you she was already thinking through logistics rather than obstacles. Halfway through the conversation, William had a coughing fit. It was bad enough that he had to leave the table for a few minutes, and when he came back, both Clara and Elias were looking at him with the same expression, and he realized they had been talking about him in his absence, and that he didn't mind. How long has that been going on? Elias asked. Long enough, William said, which was not an answer. Elias looked at him. You need to see a doctor before we talk about mountain trails in winter. I need to save my ranch, William said. You need to do both, Clara said. Her voice was firm and exhausted in equal measure. Papa, you need to do both. William looked at his daughter in the lamplight and thought about promises. About the one he'd made at Margaret's grave, that Clara would never be alone. About the one he'd made to himself, that he would hold this land until there was someone worthy to pass it to. He looked at the mountain man sitting across from him, who had ridden up with nothing but himself, and had spent every day since making himself indispensable in ways nobody had asked him to. All right, William said. He folded his hands on the table. 3 days. We handle the doctor and the paperwork situation first. Then we talk about the trail. Elias nodded. Agreed. And Elias, William said. He looked up. The next time you have information that affects this family, William said, you don't wait for the right moment. You tell me. Elias held his gaze. Yes, sir, he said. I understand. Clara started clearing the cups from the table, and the lamp threw long shadows across the room, and outside the snow had started again. The same quiet, unapologetic kind it always was. And William Carter sat at his kitchen table and felt the shape of something changing. The shape of who this family was. The shape of who would be part of it. He was scared of it the way you're scared of anything that means enough to lose. But underneath the fear, further down in the place where Margaret used to live, he felt something else. He felt right. And then Elias Walker said quietly, almost to himself, looking at the papers on the table. Your neighbor Haskell. What do you know about his arrangement with Whitmore's feed contract? William went still. Why? He said. Because if Whitmore is pressuring this ranch through financial instruments, Elias said, he's not doing it alone. He needs someone local who knows the territory, someone who knows the land, the debts, the timing. He paused. Haskell sold his East pasture water rights 6 months ago, before the drought, before anyone knew how bad the season would be. He sold them to Whitmore Land Company at a price that only made sense if he knew something was coming. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara had stopped moving. William said very carefully, "Harold Haskell has been my neighbor for 22 years. "I know," Elias said. "I'm sorry." And he looked it. He looked genuinely sorry to be the person saying it, but he didn't take it back. William sat with that for a long, terrible moment. Then he said, "I need some air." And he got up and went to the porch, and the cold hit him like a wall, and he stood there in the dark with his hand pressed to his chest and thought about 22 years of a neighbor he thought he knew. He heard the door behind him. He expected Clara. It was Elias. He stood beside William without saying anything, looking out at the dark the same way William was looking at it. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer explanation. He just stood there, present, which was what the moment actually needed. And William recognized it, and was grateful for it in a way he couldn't have said out loud. After a while, William said, "You're sure?" "No," Elias said. "But I'm sure enough that you need to be careful." William nodded. He coughed once, caught it, quickly pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. He thought Elias hadn't noticed. "Mr. Carter," Elias said, and his voice was quiet and direct. "Whatever this is, the cough, it doesn't change what I'm asking. Not one bit. I want you to know that." William looked at him in the dark. "I came here for Clara," Elias said. "But I came here for the life she lives too. And the man who is part of that life is standing right here. And I'm not going anywhere because something is hard." He paused. "I've been on my own for a long time. I know what it costs. I'm not afraid of the cost." William looked at the man beside him for a long time. This man with the worn coat and the scarred hands, and the 4-year-old map in his pocket, and the habit of paying attention to everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "My daughter," he said, "is the best thing I ever had a hand in, and I want you to know that before anything else gets said or done." Elias said nothing. He just waited. "I haven't said yes yet," William said. "No, sir." "But I haven't said no either." A pause. "No, sir," Elias said again, quieter this time. William looked out at the dark. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start on the problem, one thing at a time." He went back inside. Elias stood on the porch alone for a moment before following. And somewhere to the north, past Greer's Ridge, past the tree line, past the place where the trail that Elias Walker had almost died on 4 years ago disappeared into the high mountain dark, something waited. Whether it was salvation or ruin, there was no way to tell yet. There never was at the beginning of the things that changed your life. The doctor's name was Harlan Briggs, and he had been practicing medicine in Colton's Creek for 19 years, which meant he had delivered most of the children in the county and buried a fair number of their parents. He was not a man who softened things unnecessarily, which was why William had always trusted him, and also why he had been avoiding this particular visit for 3 months. Elias drove the wagon. William hadn't asked him to. He had simply appeared at the door at 7 in the morning with the horse already hitched, and William had looked at him and decided that arguing about it would cost more energy than he currently had to spend. Clara had wanted to come. William had told her to stay and mind the ranch. She had given him the look, her mother's look, the one that communicated precisely how much she disagreed, while simultaneously acknowledging it was not her decision to override, and she had stayed. But she had pressed Elias's arm briefly as they left just once. Just her hand on his coat sleeve for a moment, and Elias had looked down at it, and then straight ahead, and William had seen both things and said nothing. The ride into town took 40 minutes. Elias said almost nothing the entire way, which William appreciated. A man who understood when silence was the right language was a man worth knowing. Dr. Briggs examined him for 30 minutes while Elias waited in the outer room. Then the doctor sat down across from William and folded his hands on his desk and told him what he already knew plainly and without performance. Consumption, he said. I've been watching the early signs for 2 years, William. I'm sorry I didn't push harder before now. William sat with that word for a moment. It was strange how a word you'd been carrying for months could still land with weight when someone finally said it out loud. How long? He said. That depends on a lot of things, the doctor said. How you rest, how you eat, whether you avoid the cold and the stress that aggravates it. He paused. A year, maybe more if you take care of yourself, less if you don't. I need at least 40 days, William said. Dr. Briggs stared at him. I beg your pardon? There's a situation with the ranch, William said. 40 days to resolve it. After that I'll rest. I'll do whatever you tell me. The doctor looked at him for a long moment. William. 40 days, William said. I've been a patient man my whole life, Harlan. I'm asking you for 40 days. The doctor stood up, turned away, briefly, turned back. What's the situation? William told him. Not everything, but enough: the loan, the Whitmore purchase, the accelerated schedule. He did not mention the mining trail. When he finished, the doctor was quiet. Douglas Whitmore, Briggs said finally, and the way he said the name told William there was history there. You know him, William said. I know what he did to the Perkins family 7 years ago, Briggs said. Different mechanism, same outcome. John Perkins is in Denver now, working in a factory because Douglas Whitmore decided he wanted that land, and he had the money and the lawyers to take it. William looked at him. 40 days, Briggs said. He pointed a finger at William. But you're taking these. He wrote out a prescription quickly and pushed it across the desk. And you are not riding into mountains in winter. I don't care what the reason is. Your lungs cannot take that kind of cold. William took the paper. He didn't say anything about the mountain trail. He also didn't say he wouldn't go. When he came out to the waiting room, Elias read his face in about 3 seconds and stood up without a word. They walked to the wagon. They climbed up. Elias released the brake and turned the horse back toward the ranch road, and when they were clear of town he said, What did he say? He said 40 days is possible, William said. That's not all he said. No, William agreed. That's not all he said. Elias was quiet for a moment, holding the reins steady. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry yet, William said. Be useful. Elias looked at him sideways, and William saw something shift in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the kind of recognition that happens between two people who think alike when neither of them expected it. All right, Elias said. Then here's useful. While you were inside, I ran into Tom Beller at the dry goods store. William knew Tom Beller owned the feed and seed. At the end of Main Street, had run it for 15 years, was as embedded in the local business network as anyone in town. He told me something interesting, Elias continued. Apparently Gerald Crane has been in town for 3 days. Not one. He's been meeting with the county land records office. Not to file anything. To review historical surveys. William turned to look at him. Which surveys? The northeast quadrant, Elias said. Greer's Ridge and above. The information settled like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples of it moved outward in every direction. They already know about the mining claim, William said. I think someone does, Elias said carefully. Whether it's Nathan or his father or Crane acting on his own initiative, I don't know. But someone has been in those records looking for something, and the only thing of value in that quadrant that isn't already claimed is what I found 4 years ago. William pressed his hand against his chest, not from the cough, just from the pressure of thinking fast in too many directions. If they file a survey claim before we reach the site, then it becomes theirs, Elias said. Legally, regardless of what I found or when I found it. How long does a survey claim filing take? In this county, with the right connections and a lawyer like Crane pushing it. Elias kept his voice even. 4 days, maybe 5. 4 days. The distance to the mining site was 2 days' ride in normal conditions. In early winter, with the snowpack building in the high passes, it was longer. And William was not supposed to go into the cold, and Clara would fight him on it, and both of those things were true, and also completely beside the point. "Then we leave tomorrow," William said. "I was going to say tonight," Elias said. "But tomorrow at first light is better. We'll need to pack properly." William looked at him. "You're not going to tell me I shouldn't go." "Would it change anything?" Elias said. "No," William said. "Then I'm not going to waste either of our time," Elias said. "But I want you to listen to me on the trail. About pace, about stopping, about shelter. You tell me when something's wrong. You don't push through without telling me." "Agreed," William said, after a pause that was shorter than it might have been a week ago. They drove back to the ranch in the thinning afternoon light, and William spent the rest of that drive thinking not about the trail or the mining site or Nathan Whitmore, but about the man sitting beside him. This man who had arrived with nothing, who had asked for the one thing William had that mattered most, and who had then proceeded to make himself so thoroughly necessary to the survival of everything else that the two things had become impossible to separate. Clara was on the porch when they returned. She read their faces the same way Elias had read William's outside the doctor's office, and she came down the steps to meet them, and she looked at her father, and William watched something in her face go very still, not collapse, not panic, just still. The way a person goes still when they hear news they had been half preparing for. "Come inside," she said, to both of them. They told her everything. William let Elias lay out the situation with the mining claim and the survey records, because Elias presented it clearly, and without additional weight, just the facts and what they meant. Clara listened without interrupting, which was how she handled things she needed to think hard about. When they finished, she sat at the table for a moment, hands wrapped around an empty coffee cup. "You're going," she said. It was not a question. She was looking at her father. "We're going," William said. She didn't argue. He had expected her to argue. She looked at Elias instead. "You'll keep him from doing something foolish on that trail." "I'll do my best," Elias said. "He's a stubborn man." "I'm aware," Clara said. And something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, but the cousin of one. Then it was gone, and she was practical again. "I'm coming." "Clara," William started. "You have a lung condition," she said. "Elias has been on that trail once and barely made it back. You need someone who can assess the medical situation in the field and make decisions if one of you can't." She looked at her father steadily. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you the reality of it." William looked at Elias. Elias looked at the table. "You knew she'd say this," William said to him. "I suspected," Elias said carefully. "And you didn't warn me." "I didn't think it was my warning to give," Elias said. He glanced at Clara. "She's right about the medical situation." William sat back. He was outmaneuvered, and he knew it, which was a strange and not entirely unpleasant feeling coming from these two particular people. "Fine," he said. "First light." That night, while Elias checked and packed their equipment in the barn, and William rested under doctor's orders, Clara came out to help. She found Elias checking the condition of the second horse's shoes by lamplight, running his thumb along the edge of each hoof with practiced attention. "You knew about his health before today," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact offered to the air between them. Elias set the hoof down carefully. "I suspected," he said. "The cough, the way he moved in the cold. I didn't know what it was." "Why didn't you say anything to me?" He looked at her. "Because it wasn't mine to say, and because I figured you already knew." She was quiet a moment. "I've known for 2 months," she said. "I've been trying to get him to see Dr. Briggs for 2 months. She set down the rope she was coiling. He's the most stubborn man who ever lived." "He loves you," Elias said. "Stubborn men do foolish things when they love something." Clara looked at him. "So do other kinds of men, I imagine." "Yes, ma'am," Elias said. "Other kinds, too." The air between them held something that neither of them addressed directly, which was its own kind of conversation. "Elias?" Clara said. He looked up. "Whatever happens on this trail," she said, "whether we find what you found on that map or we come back with nothing, I want you to know that I see what you've been doing here." She kept her eyes on him straight and clear. "Not for the ranch. For him. For us. I see it." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I came here for one reason," he said. "Everything else followed from that." "I know," she said. And she picked up the rope again and went back to coiling it, and the lamplight moved between them, and the horses shifted in their stalls, and nothing more was said, but everything necessary had been. They left at first light. The first day was hard but manageable. The trail climbed steadily into the high country, and the cold was the serious, purposeful kind that had moved in for the season. William held pace better than Elias had expected, and than Clara had hoped, which were two ways of saying the same thing. He coughed intermittently, but controlled it, and when Elias called a stop at midday to rest the horses and eat, William didn't argue, which told Elias he was managing more discomfort than he was letting on. "Tell me about the trail from here," Clara said, studying the terrain Elias had sketched from memory on a piece of paper. Her eyes were sharp and serious on it. "The next section is the tricky part," Elias said. "There's a pass about 3 hours ahead. In summer, it's an hour's ride. This time of year, the wind through it can be severe. We move fast, and we don't stop in the middle. And after the pass," she said, "the valley drops and then rises again. The second rise is where the old mining camp is. About a half day past the pass, maybe longer, if the snow is deep." "And you said there was a point where you lost the horses last time." "Above the second rise," he said. "There's a section of ice shelf. I was on foot for the last part of the approach." Clara folded the paper. "We'll manage," she said. She looked at her father. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who is cold and tired and too old for this," William said. "But not like a man who needs to stop." "Good," she said. And they moved on. The pass was everything Elias had warned about. The wind came through it sideways, and mean, and for about 20 minutes they moved with their heads down, and the horses tight together, and nobody spoke, because speaking cost warmth. William hunched low over his horse, and Clara rode close enough that she could reach out and touch his arm, and Elias watched both of them from the edge of his vision, while keeping his eyes forward on the trail. They came out the other side intact, and everyone breathed, and William's cough was bad for about 5 minutes after, and Clara moved her horse alongside his and put her hand on his back without asking, and he straightened up and got it under control, and didn't look at either of them. "I'm all right," he said. "I know you are," she said, and stayed beside him anyway. They made camp short of the second rise. Elias built the fire with the speed and efficiency of a man who had made camps alone in all weather, and Clara had the cooking gear organized before the fire was properly caught, and William sat close to the warmth and drank the tea. Clara handed him and watched the two of them work around each other in the small space of the camp with a naturalness that stopped his breath for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. They hadn't worked out that ease in the weeks at the ranch. It had apparently come of its own accord, the way those things do not performed, not negotiated, just the organic fit of two people who move through the world at compatible speeds. He drank his tea and said nothing. Later, when Clara had gone to sleep in the bedroll they'd rigged in the partial shelter of a rock outcrop, and the fire was lower. Elias sat across from William, and they looked at the coals, without speaking for a while. "What was her mother like?" Elias asked. William considered the question, not whether to answer it but how. "Like Clara mostly," he said finally. "Same eyes, same way of making you feel like a fool without ever saying a foolish thing." He paused. "She would have figured you out in about 10 minutes. "What would she have decided?" Elias said. "That's the thing," William said. "I think you'd have been the one she was waiting for. Not because you're perfect, but because you're honest, and you're not afraid of work, and you never tried to be something you're not." He looked at the coals. Margaret had no patience for pretending. She could smell it from a county over. Elias was quiet. "She would have liked the way you handled Dolly," William said. "That would have been the thing, I think. A man who treats an old animal gently because it needs gentleness, not because anyone's watching." I'm not sure that's enough qualification to be trusted with a person's daughter, Elias said. But there was no deflection in it, just honesty. No, William said. It's not enough on its own, but it's the kind of thing that points to everything else. He coughed once, controlled it, looked up. Elias. Sir? I've been trying since you rode up to find the thing in you that should concern me, William said. I've been looking hard. You understand that. I want you to know I've been looking hard. I'd expect nothing less, Elias said. I haven't found it, William said, and I'm not sure if that's because it isn't there or because I'm too sick to see clearly. He paused. So I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to understand what it means. Elias waited. If we get off this mountain with what we need to save this ranch, William said, and if you still want what you came asking for, my answer is yes. The fire cracked between them. The cold pressed in from all sides. Somewhere in the dark above them, the mountain held its silence. Elias looked at William Carter for a long moment, and William saw something move through the man's face that was difficult to name. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter and more permanent than either. Thank you, Elias said. Just that. Quietly, and with the full weight of what he meant behind it. Don't thank me yet, William said. We're still on a mountain. They reached the second rise at midday. The ice shelf Elias had warned about was exactly where he'd remembered it, a long, slanted section, where the rock beneath had gone glassy, and the horses moved with the slow, deliberate reluctance of animals who knew better than their riders the danger of the footing. They dismounted and led them, which was slower and colder, and the right thing to do. Then Clara said, "Stop." Her voice was sharp and controlled in the way that immediately told both men not to ask questions, just to stop. They stopped. "Down there," she said very low. "To the left, coming up the south approach." Elias looked. It took him a moment to see it, movement that was too deliberate to be animal, too organized to be accidental. 3 riders, maybe 4, working up the southern face of the rise. Still below them, still behind, but not far enough, and closing. "Whitmore's men," William said. His voice was flat. "They filed the survey," Elias said. "That's why Crane was in those records. They weren't researching. They were preparing." "How far are we from the site?" Clara said. 40 minutes on foot if the shelf holds," Elias said. He was already calculating. "But they'll see us on the open section." "Then we move now," Clara said, "before they're close enough to be certain of what they're seeing." Nobody argued. They left the horses tied at the edge of the shelf and crossed on foot, and the wind was making the kind of sound that discouraged conversation, which was fine because there wasn't much to say. The shelf held. It held unevenly. Elias's boot cracked through to the rock twice, and William went to one knee once on a slick section, and Clara grabbed his arm and held it until he steadied, but it held and they crossed it. On the other side, the terrain changed. Elias moved with the particular focused certainty of a man who has spent years navigating by memory and landmark, and Clara watched how he moved and matched it, and William followed them both with his jaw set and his breathing deliberate. 15 minutes later, Elias stopped. He looked at a rock face that appeared ordinary in every visible way, scanned it left to right, then moved to a section on the right side and pressed his hand against a vertical crack. "Here," he said. William came up beside him and looked at the crack. "That's the entrance. The original crew sealed it," Elias said. "Planned to come back. They didn't." He pulled out the folded map from inside his coat and checked it once, though his confidence told you it was confirmation, not discovery. 3 feet in the passage opens. After that, it's maybe 15 feet to the drift itself. Clara was looking back the way they came. "How long before those riders reach the shelf?" 20 minutes, Elias said. "Maybe less." "Then open it," she said. Elias worked at the sealed entrance with the tools from his pack, a short pry bar and a rock pick, and William worked beside him without being asked, applying his weight to sections that needed breaking rather than prying. They worked without wasted motion, and Clara watched the back trail and kept the time in her head. The seal broke inward. Cold air came out of the darkness, stale and mineral. "Give me the lamp," Elias said. Clara passed it over. Elias ducked inside. A few seconds of silence. Then his voice, echoing slightly from within, "Come through." William and Clara followed. What the lamplight showed stopped all three of them for a moment. The drift was not large, maybe 12 feet wide and 7 feet high, but what it contained was unmistakable to anyone with any knowledge of mining, which William had from his father, and Clara had from listening to her father, and Elias had from years in territory where silver was the only reason most men passed through. The vein ran along the upper left wall of the drift, thick and bright, where the lamp caught it disappearing into the rock at both ends, and promising more beyond what was visible. "God in heaven," William said softly. "I know," Elias said. Clara pulled out the small ledger she'd brought for this purpose, without being asked, without anyone suggesting it, just because she had thought it through and come prepared, and she began documenting. What was visible? The dimensions. The location by reference to the landmarks they'd noted on the way in. The date and the time. She wrote quickly and clearly, and neither man spoke while she did it. "This is enough," she said when she finished. "More than enough. This is worth 10 times the note." "We need to get it registered," Elias said, "with a proper claim filing, today, if possible." "We need to get off this mountain first," William said. And even as he said it, they heard it, the sound from outside voices carrying in the cold air too close. The three of them looked at each other in the lamplight. "How many ways out of this passage?" Clara said. "One," Elias said. "Then we go out the one way," she said with the calm of a woman who had made decisions before and understood that speed mattered more than comfort. She looked at Elias. "You go first. I'll stay with Papa." "Clara," Elias started. "I'm not the one they'll want to stop," she said. "You have the map. You're the witness to the original find. If they're going to block anyone, it's you. So you need to be out first, and you need to be clear of them before they know what's happening." She looked at him with those steady dark eyes. "Go." Elias looked at her for 2 seconds. 3. The kind of look that contains an entire argument and the concession of that argument simultaneously. "Stay behind the rock line when you come out," he said. "Give me 45 seconds." Then he was through the entrance and gone. William looked at his daughter in the lamplight. "Your mother," he said, "would have done exactly the same thing." "I know," Clara said. "Now come on." They came out of the passage 45 seconds later into a different world than the one they'd left. Elias was already 20 yards ahead, moving fast and low across the open section toward the rock cover on the far side, and 2 of the riders had reached the flat below the shelf and were shouting something that the wind took apart before it arrived. A third man was closer, too close already on foot, coming up the shelf with the careful, angry urgency of someone who had understood too late that he was behind. William went left without being told, because left was away from the third man, and toward the horses, and toward Elias, and Clara went with him, hand on his arm, not pulling him, but present the way she'd been on the trail. The third man reached the edge of the passage entrance and stopped. He looked at the open seal. He looked at William and Clara moving across the shelf. He looked at Elias already at the rock line on the far side. He was making the calculation that men in this situation always made what was he authorized to do, and what would it cost him if he got it wrong. Elias had stopped at the rock line. He was watching the man. The man looked at Elias. "That site is under survey claim by the Whitmore Land Company," he said, loud enough to carry. "Filed this morning with the county land office." "Interesting," Elias said, his voice perfectly level. "Because the original discovery of that site was documented and witnessed 4 years ago, and the documentation I'm holding establishes prior claim." He held up the map. Not triumphantly, just clearly. "The way you hold evidence. Your survey was filed this morning. My discovery predates your employer's filing by 4 years. A judge is going to find that very interesting." The man stared at him. "Tell Douglas Whitmore," Elias said, "that William Carter's legal counsel will be in touch, and tell him that the next time he wants to use a sick man's land note as a weapon, he should make sure there isn't already a counter-instrument waiting in the wings. The man said nothing. Behind him, the two riders on the flat below had stopped watching. "We're leaving now," Elias said. "You can stay and freeze, or you can go back the way you came. But this conversation is done." He turned and walked to the horses, and William and Clara came across the shelf and caught up with him, and the three of them moved back down the mountain together, and nobody came after them. Not immediately. But William Carter riding down from that mountain with the cold in his lungs, and his daughter on his left, and the man he'd just promised his blessing to on his right understood clearly and completely that the mountain was the easy part. What came next? The filing, the legal fight, the Whitmore machine turning its full weight on a ranch with a sick owner, and a contested claim that was where the real test was going to happen. And underneath that understanding, steady and clear as anything he'd ever felt, was the knowledge that for the first time in 6 years, he was not walking into it alone. He rode and he breathed, and the mountain fell away behind them, and the valley opened up ahead. And somewhere down there was a county land office that was about to have a very complicated morning. They rode hard off that mountain and didn't stop until they hit the edge of Colton's Creek, where the trail widened, and the horses could breathe proper, and William could stop pretending the last 4 hours hadn't cost him more than he was letting on. His face was the color of old ash, and his breathing had the shallow, careful quality of a man rationing something that was running low, but his eyes were sharp and his back was straight, and he had not said a single word of complaint since they crossed the ice shelf which Clara had been tracking with the precise attention of someone who loves a stubborn man and knows better than to call attention to the watching. Elias pulled his horse alongside William's without comment and matched his pace close enough that if something went wrong, he could be there immediately. William noticed. He didn't acknowledge it. That was its own kind of acceptance. "Land office closes at 4, Elias said. He was looking at the angle of the light. "We have maybe 90 minutes. "Then we don't stop," Clara said. They didn't stop. The Colton's Creek County Land Office occupied a narrow building wedged between the assayer's office and the telegraph station, and its clerk was a thin man named Aldous Prim, who had worked that desk for 11 years and had developed the particular manner of a person who believed that bureaucratic process was the last wall standing between civilization and chaos. He was not wrong about this exactly, but he enforced it with more personal satisfaction than was strictly necessary. He looked up when the three of them came through the door, cold road dusty, carrying the particular urgency of people who had been through something. And his expression said very clearly that he was 40 minutes from closing time. And whatever this was, it was going to make his afternoon complicated. "We need to file a prior discovery claim," Elias said. He put the map, Clara's documentation ledger, and his own written statement on the counter in a single organized motion. "Northeast quadrant above Greer's Ridge. Secondary drift off the abandoned Tolliver vein." Aldous Prim looked at the documents. Then he looked at Elias. Then he looked at the documents again with the careful absence of expression that told you he already knew something about this situation. "There's a survey claim filed on that quadrant," Prim said. "Filed this morning, Whitmore Land Company." "I'm aware," Elias said. "This is a prior discovery claim predating that survey filing by 4 years. The documentation here includes the original map, dated notation of discovery, and a witnessed account. We are establishing prior rights under Territorial Mining Statute Section 14, which you know as well as I do, supersedes a subsequent survey claim when prior discovery can be demonstrated." Prim looked at him for a longer moment. "You know your mining statutes," he said. "I've had reason to learn them," Elias said. "The Whitmore filing was processed by Gerald Crane," Prim said carefully. "He's a lawyer." "I understand," Elias said. "And what I'm filing is a legal instrument under territorial law. Your obligation is to receive it and record it. The question of competing claims is for a judge to resolve." He kept his voice even, not aggressive, not deferential, just stating fact in the flat, clear way of a man who had prepared for this specific conversation. "Unless you're telling me you're declining to receive a legal filing, The silence in that office was the particular silence of a man weighing what he was authorized to do against what he was being pressured toward. Clara put her hand on the counter beside the documents. "Mr. Prim," she said. Her voice was quiet and direct. "My father is ill. We came off that mountain today in difficult conditions to be here before your closing time. We are filing a legal document that this office is required to receive. Please do your job." Something in Aldous Prim rearranged itself. He looked at Clara Carter the way people looked at her mother 30 years ago when Margaret fixed her attention on something and refused to let it slide. He picked up the documents. He began to read them with genuine attention. "I'll need to verify the territorial statute reference," he said. "Take your time," Elias said. He took 12 minutes. The three of them stood at that counter in their trail coats and didn't move, and William held himself upright through what Clara recognized as pure stubbornness and nothing else, and she stood close enough to brace him if it became necessary and prayed it wouldn't. Prim looked up from the documents. "The statute reference is correct," he said with the slight tone of a man who had hoped it wouldn't be. He pulled a form from his drawer. "I'll need your signature here, and your witness signatures here, and a $5 filing fee." "I have it," Clara said, and produced the exact amount from her coat pocket, because of course she did. Prim filed the claim. He stamped it. He handed them their copy. His face was entirely professional and revealed nothing, but as they were leaving, he said quietly to no one in particular, "The Whitmore family has a great deal of influence in this county." "Yes, sir," Elias said at the door. "And this county has a territorial court that operates above that influence." He held the door for Clara and William. "Good afternoon, Mr. Prim." They were outside in the cold air with the stamped document in Clara's hand, and for a moment none of them spoke. Then William said, "We need a lawyer." "We need one today," Elias said, "before Crane finds out what we filed and moves to challenge it." "Dr. Briggs mentioned a name," William said. "Someone in town," said he was honest. "Briggs knows everyone," Clara said. She was already looking down the street. "I'll find him. You two get the horses to the livery and get warm. Papa." She turned to her father with the look that brooked no argument. "You sit down somewhere and do not move until I come back." "Clara." "Sit down," she said, not unkindly, just with the finality of a woman who has made her decision and is already moving. William watched her walk down the street. Then he looked at Elias. "She does that," he said. "Does what?" Elias said. "Decide something, and then it's decided," William said. "Her mother was the same way. You'll get used to it." Elias looked at him. "Is that your way of telling me the answer is still yes?" William almost smiled. "Get the horses to the livery," he said, "before I change my mind." The lawyer's name was Cornelius Hatch, and he was not what either of them had expected. He was 62 years old, small and compact, with sharp brown eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the unhurried manner of a man who had seen enough urgency to know which kind was real and which kind was theater. He had practiced law in Colorado Territory for 23 years, and had spent roughly 8 of them in various forms of legal conflict with Douglas Whitmore's business interests, which he mentioned without heat, just as a statement of professional history. He read every document Clara had placed on his desk with the thoroughness of someone who charged for his time and believed the client deserved the full value of it. He asked 7 questions, 4 of which were directed at Elias and 3 at Clara. He did not direct any questions at William, which William might have taken as an insult, except that the lawyer looked at him once during the review and said quietly, "You look like a man who should be home in front of a fire. Mr. Carter, let your daughter do the talking. She's doing it better." William had looked at Clara. Clara had looked at the ceiling briefly. When Hatch finished reviewing, he set the documents down and took his spectacles off and cleaned them with the corner of his coat, in the absent way of a man thinking hard about something. Then he put them back on. "You have a case," he said. "Prior discovery is legally established by territorial statute, and the documentation here is solid. The map, the dated account, The ledger entry from today and the witness statement together create a defensible claim. He paused. But I want to be honest with you about what you're walking into. Douglas Whitmore has never lost a land dispute in this county because he has never fought one that was purely about the law. He fights everything on two fronts simultaneously, the courtroom and the community. He will come after the note on your property. He will pressure your neighbors and your suppliers, and he will do it all while presenting himself as a reasonable businessman who simply wants a fair process. We know, Clara said. I need you to understand it fully, Hatch said. Not the shape of it, the details. He has Gerald Crane, who is technically capable and completely without scruple. He has the county commissioner in his pocket in a casual way that he's never needed to formalize because it's never been tested. And he has money, which is the thing that outlasts most arguments. What do we have? Elias said. Hatch looked at him for a moment. You have a prior claim that is legally sound. You have documentation that was prepared properly. He glanced at Clara. Whoever put this ledger together thought ahead. She did, Elias said. You also have something Douglas Whitmore has never yet encountered in a land dispute, Hatch said. A counter-instrument in place before he finished filing his own. He is going to assume you scrambled this together in a panic. He doesn't know yet that you were 3 steps ahead of him. He picked up the filed claim copy. When he finds this out, and he will find it out by tomorrow morning, his response is going to tell us everything about how he intends to fight. Meaning, William said, meaning a man who is confident in his legal position responds to a counterclaim by filing a challenge through proper channels, Hatch said. And a man who is using the law as a weapon, rather than following it when his weapon fails, looks for a different kind of pressure. His voice was completely neutral. I want you to be prepared for the second kind. The room held that for a moment. What do we do first? Clara said. Tonight, nothing. Tomorrow morning, I file a motion to stay the Whitmore survey claim pending dispute resolution. That stops them from acting on the survey while the competing claims are reviewed. He looked at William. And you need to be accessible and visible in this town, Mr. Carter. Not because it changes the legal argument, but because Douglas Whitmore's secondary strategy always involves making the opposing party look unstable or disreputable. Your presence as a known respected member of this community is itself a form of evidence. He's not well, Clara said. I can see that, Hatch said. He looked at William steadily. I'm not asking you to perform health you don't have. I'm asking you to be seen being yourself, that's all. William nodded once. I can do that. Good, Hatch said. He folded his hands. Now, the loan note. Tell me the exact terms of the original instrument and the notification letter you received from the bank. They were in Hatch's office for 2 more hours. By the time they walked out into the dark street, William was moving on will alone, and even his will was running thin. Elias put a hand under his arm at the bottom of the office steps, not making a production of it, just present and steady, and William leaned into it for 2 steps before he caught himself. I've got it, William said. I know you do, Elias said, and kept his hand where it was. They stayed the night at the Colton's Creek boarding house, rather than riding back in the dark, which was Elias's decision stated as a practical matter and not discussed further. Clara took a room, and William took a room, and Elias sat in the downstairs common room until late drinking coffee that had been sitting too long and thinking through the shape of the next few days. The proprietor of this boarding house was a widow named Mrs. Garfield, who had the kind of sharp observational intelligence that develops in women who manage a public house and must assess strangers quickly. She refilled Elias's coffee around 9 o'clock and stayed a moment. You're the man who's been working William Carter's ranch, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. People in town have been talking, she said. What are they saying? He asked. Some say you're a drifter who's after the property, she said without apparent judgment. Just reporting. And the others, he said. She looked at him for a moment. The others say you're the first man who ever came to that ranch and seemed more interested in keeping it than taking it. She picked up the coffee pot. I don't know which is true. The second one, he said. She looked at him for another moment, with the particular assessment of a woman who has housed 100 drifters and learned to tell the difference between what they said and what they meant. Then she nodded once the way people nod when they've made a decision they're prepared to stand by, and went back to the kitchen. At 10 o'clock, Clara came downstairs. She was wearing her coat over her nightclothes, which meant she hadn't slept and hadn't tried to. She poured herself a cup of the old coffee and sat across from Elias and looked at the table. He sounded worse tonight, she said. Through the wall. The cough. Dr. Briggs said the cold aggravates it, Elias said. I know what Briggs said. She wrapped both hands around the cup. What Briggs didn't say, what nobody says, is what it's like to listen to your father cough through a wall in a town you don't live in 2 days after you found out you're going to lose him. Her voice stayed level, but it cost her something to keep it that way. I'm not telling you that because I want you to fix it. I'm telling you because I've been holding it since the doctor's office, and I needed to put it somewhere. Elias looked at her. Put it here then, he said. That's what I'm for. Clara looked up at him. The lamp between them was low, and the common room was empty except for the two of them, and outside the town made the small noises that towns make at night when most people are asleep. You know what frightens me most, she said. He waited. It's not losing the ranch, she said. It's not even she stopped steadied. It's that he's been fighting this by himself. The health, the finances, all of it. He thought he was protecting me by not telling me, but all he did was carry it alone for months. Her jaw tightened. He should not have had to carry it alone. No, Elias agreed quietly. He shouldn't have. Neither should you, she said. And the way she said it shifted the conversation, not dramatically, not with any performance, just a quiet turn in the road that they both recognized. Elias looked at her steadily. I'm not carrying anything alone right now, he said. I haven't been since the first night at that supper table. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My father gave you his answer on the mountain. He did? Elias said. I haven't given you mine, she said. The lamp flickered slightly between them. Elias held very still. So I'm giving it now, she said. Yes, my answer is yes. Not because of the ranch, not because of the mountain, not because of any of the events of the last 3 weeks. Because of the way you talked to an old cow in a cold barn when you thought nobody was listening. She met his eyes directly. Because the man you are when no one is watching is the man I want beside me. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Clara, he said, then stopped. Started again. I don't have much to offer you in the way of material things. I know that, she said. This situation might get harder before it gets easier. I know that too, she said. And your father, he started. My father gave you his yes, and I'm giving you mine, she said. We'll face everything else together. That's the point of yes. Elias Walker sat in the quiet common room of a boarding house in Colton's Creek, Colorado Territory in the winter of 1878 and looked at the woman across from him and felt something settle into place in his chest, like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Not the tumbling urgency of something new, but the deep, solid quiet of something that had found where it belonged. All right, he said. Then yes. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers for a moment. Then she stood up, picked up her coffee cup and said, Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. She was right about that. Douglas Whitmore arrived in Colton's Creek at 8 o'clock the following morning in a carriage that had been specifically chosen at some point in its purchase to communicate authority. He was 60 years old, heavier than his son, with the face of a man who had long ago stopped needing to explain himself to anyone who wasn't above him on a ledger sheet, and he currently wasn't sure there was anyone above him on a ledger sheet. He was not accustomed to surprises. Gerald Crane had delivered one to him the night before via telegraph, and he had ridden through the dark to deal with it personally, which told you how much the surprise had cost him. Elias saw the carriage arrive from the boarding house window. He was already dressed. He went and knocked on William's door, and then Clara's, And by the time Douglas Whitmore walked into the common room of the Colton's Creek Hotel across the street, all three of them were at the diner 2 doors down, eating breakfast with the unhurried efficiency of people who had nothing to hide and somewhere to be. Hatch found them there at 8:30. He sat down, accepted coffee, and said, "Crane filed a challenge to your prior claim at 7 this morning. They're arguing the documentation is insufficient to establish 4-year prior discovery without additional corroboration." "What kind of corroboration?" Elias said. "A third-party witness to the original discovery," Hatch said. "Someone who can independently verify that the map and discovery account are what you say they are and not manufactured after the fact." "There was no third party," Elias said. "I was alone." "I know," Hatch said, "and that's a genuine legal vulnerability. Prior discovery claims by single individuals without witness corroboration are challengeable under the same statute that protects them. Crane knows what he's doing." William put his coffee cup down. "So we need someone who can corroborate the timeline. Not the discovery itself, just that it happened when he says it did." "Yes," Hatch said. 4 years ago," Clara said, and she was looking at Elias. "You were running trap lines. Who did you sell your pelts to?" Elias went still. Then slowly, "Caleb Morrison. He ran the trading post on the Morrison Creek Trail. He bought my whole winter take in March of that year. I remember because there was an argument about the price of beaver, and he owed me for 3 extra days' delay." He leaned forward slightly. "He would have records. Traders keep records going back years for tax purposes." "And if his records show you in the high country northeast of Greer's Ridge that winter," Clara said. "It corroborates the timeline," Hatch said. He was already picking up his hat. "Where is Morrison now?" "Last I heard, he'd moved the trading post 10 miles north near the Halsey Fork," Elias said. "That was 2 years ago." "I can send a man today," Hatch said. "If Morrison's records exist, and he'll testify, this challenge collapses." He looked at them around the table. "It also means Crane and Whitmore know their legal position just got weaker, and that's when the other kind of pressure starts." "You said that last night," William said. "The other kind of pressure." "Yes," Hatch said. "And I want to tell you what I heard this morning before I came here." Whitmore had a conversation with Roy Hendricks at the bank last night. Hendricks is the branch manager. Whitmore was requesting an accounting of all outstanding notes held by the bank against properties in this county. The table was very quiet. "He's not just coming after your note," Clara said. "He's building a picture. He's building leverage," Hatch said, "against anyone who might support you in a legal dispute. Your neighbors, your suppliers, anyone who has bank business that Whitmore can complicate." He looked at William. "He wants you isolated. He knows that a sick man fighting a legal battle without community support is a man who eventually runs out of endurance." William's jaw set. "Harold Haskell," he said. Hatch waited. "My neighbor," William said. 22 years. Elias believes he's been providing Whitmore with information about our situation. Land timing finances. Hatch absorbed this without visible reaction, which was either professionalism or the lack of surprise of a man who'd seen it before. "That would explain some of the timing precision we've been seeing," he said. "If Whitmore had a local source giving him the operational details of your ranch, he would have known exactly when to move on the note." "I need to talk to Haskell," William said. "William," Clara started. "Not to confront him," William said. He looked at his daughter steadily. "I have known Harold Haskell for 22 years. Whatever he did, whatever deal he made with Whitmore, I am going to look him in the eye and ask him why." His voice was quiet and completely certain. "And then I'm going to give him the chance to do the right thing." Clara looked at her father, then at Elias. Elias said nothing. He was watching William with the expression of a man who understood exactly what this cost and respected that it was happening anyway. "I'll come with you," Elias said. "No," William said. "This one I do alone." He went that afternoon. Harold Haskell's place was a 30-minute ride from town, and William made it on the horse Elias had readied without comment, pressing the cloth to his mouth twice on the road and folding it back into his pocket before he got to Haskell's gate. He wanted to be clean when he did this. He wanted it to be just two men, a 22-year friendship, and the truth. Haskell came out of his barn when he heard the horse. He was 60 years old, broad and weathered, and when he saw who it was, something happened on his face that William had never seen there in all the years he had known him. Something collapsed, quietly, like a wall that had been waiting to go down. "William," he said. "Harold," William said. He didn't get off his horse immediately. He looked at his neighbor for a long moment from that height. "Tell me why." Haskell pressed his hand against the barn door. He didn't pretend not to understand the question. That at least was something. "The water rights," Haskell said. "When Whitmore bought up the East Fork rights through the Greer sale, he came to me with an offer. Not for land, for information." He stopped. "I told myself it wasn't hurting you directly, that it was just business knowledge, things anyone paying attention could figure out." "You told him about the loan," William said. "I told him about the timing," Haskell said. His voice had gone low and rough. "I didn't know what he'd do with it. I told myself that." "Did you believe yourself?" William said. Haskell didn't answer that, which was an answer. William sat with it for a moment. 22 years. Haskell at Margaret's funeral, standing by the grave in the cold, without being asked, staying for 2 hours after everyone else had gone. Haskell's wife bringing food to the house for 3 weeks after. All of that was real. It had been real. And this was also real. Both things were true at the same time, and that was the particular cruelty of being betrayed by someone you had genuinely trusted. "I need something from you," William said. "Not for me, for what's right." Haskell looked at him. "Cornelius Hatch is filing a motion on my behalf tomorrow," William said. "If you have any documentation of what Whitmore asked you for, and what you gave him, anything in writing, any letters, any record of payment, I need you to bring it to Hatch's office by tomorrow morning." "William," Haskell said, and his voice had the sound of a man who can see exactly how much something is going to cost him. "If I do that, Whitmore will come after my water contract. He'll—" "I know," William said. "I know what it'll cost you." He looked at his neighbor steadily. "I'm asking anyway, because you have owed me this for a long time, Harold, and because whatever you did, you are not a bad man. You are a man who made a bad choice, and bad choices can be corrected if a person has the courage for it." Haskell stood at his barn door in the cold and looked at the man he'd known for 22 years who was sitting straight on his horse despite the illness that both of them knew about, and neither of them was saying, and he didn't speak for a long time. "Give me until morning," he said finally. "Morning," William agreed. He turned his horse and rode back toward town without looking back. His chest hurt and his hands were cold, and he felt exhausted down to the marrow. But he also felt in the way a man feels when he has done a hard thing correctly, a kind of clarity that had nothing to do with the outcome. Whatever Haskell decided, he had asked the right way. That had to count for something. Elias was waiting at the edge of town when William rode in, not at the boarding house, not at Hatch's office, but at the edge of town, as though he had simply needed to be in the direction William would return from, and had acted on that without thinking about it too hard. He fell in beside him without a word, and they rode the last 2 blocks together. "How did it go?" Elias said. "Don't know yet," William said. "By morning we'll know." "Are you all right?" William considered the question with the honesty he had been practicing more of lately. "No," he said, "but I will be." Elias nodded. They tied the horses and went inside, and Clara was at the table with Hatch's paperwork spread in front of her, and she looked up when they came in, and read her father's face the way she always did, and said nothing, just moved the papers to make room, and poured coffee, and the 3 of them sat down together in the failing afternoon light, and kept working, because the morning was coming, and with it everything that the morning was going to bring. And for the first time since this whole thing had started, William Carter was not afraid of it. Not because it was going to be easy, but because he was not facing it alone. Harold Haskell came to Cornelius Hatch's office at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before anyone expected him, carrying a leather satchel that he set on the lawyer's desk without ceremony, and without meeting anyone's eyes directly. Inside the satchel were 4 letters written on Whitmore Land Company stationery, 2 receipts for payments made to Haskell, totaling $320 over 14 months, and a handwritten log that Haskell had kept apparently out of some instinct for self-preservation, that he hadn't fully understood himself until now, documenting every piece of information he had provided and the date on which he had provided it. It was more than anyone had expected. It was in Hatch's precise and understated assessment substantial. Haskell stood in the corner of the office while Hatch reviewed the documents, and William sat across the desk and watched his neighbor, and felt the complicated mixture of emotions that comes from being both vindicated and grieved simultaneously. He was angry. He had a right to be angry. And underneath the anger was something sadder and more permanent. The understanding that trust, once broken at this depth, doesn't repair itself back to what it was. It becomes something different, maybe something workable, but never the same thing again. Clara stood near the window. She had said nothing since Haskell walked in. She was watching her father, not Haskell, because her father was the one she needed to read right now. Elias was by the door. He had positioned himself there without discussion, which Clara had noticed and understood close enough to be present far enough back to make clear this moment belonged to William and Haskell and the 22 years between them. Hatch set the last document down. He looked at Haskell. "Mr. Haskell, are you prepared to make these available as evidence in a legal proceeding against Douglas Whitmore and the Whitmore Land Company?" Haskell's jaw worked for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." "You understand what that will likely mean for your water contract?" "I understand," Haskell said. "And you're prepared to testify to the accuracy of this log if called upon to do so?" "I am." Hatch nodded slowly. He picked up his pen and made a notation on his own papers. "Then I believe," he said in the measured tone of a man who rarely allowed himself enthusiasm, but was currently managing it with some effort, "that Douglas Whitmore is going to have a very difficult morning." Haskell looked at William, then finally directly. There was no performance in his face, no plea for immediate forgiveness, just a man looking at the consequences of what he'd done and not trying to rearrange them into something more comfortable. "I'm sorry, William," he said. "I know that doesn't fix it." "No," William said. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "But this does something toward it." He gestured at the satchel. "This took courage. I want you to know I see that." Haskell nodded once. He picked up his hat from the edge of the desk and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back and said, "Margaret would have been ashamed of me." "Yes," William said simply. "She would have." Haskell left. The door closed behind him. The room held its silence for a moment. Then Clara said, "All right," and the word landed like a hand coming down flat on a table, purposeful, forward-moving, done with the looking backward. "What do we do first?" Hatch was already moving. He filed the motion to stay the Whitmore survey claim at 8:15, attaching Haskell's documents as supporting evidence of bad faith conduct. He sent a rider to the Morrison Creek trading post before 9, carrying a formal request for Caleb Morrison to provide records and testimony regarding Elias Walker's presence in the high country northeast of Greer's Ridge during the winter of 1874. And at 10 o'clock, he walked into the office of Judge Emmett Sauer and requested an emergency hearing on the competing claims for the following morning. Judge Sauer was 71 years old and had been hearing cases in Colorado Territory since before it was an organized territory, and he had the particular temperament of a man who had outlasted several generations of men who thought they could pressure him. He read Hatch's motion. He read the Haskell documents. He looked over his spectacles at Hatch and said, "Douglas Whitmore is going to be unhappy about this." "He is, Your Honor," Hatch agreed. "Good," said Judge Sauer. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Both parties present." Douglas Whitmore's response to the news of the hearing came through Gerald Crane by mid-afternoon, and it arrived not at Hatch's office, but at the boarding house, delivered by a young man in a pressed coat, who handed William a sealed envelope and departed quickly. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper handwritten, which said that Mr. Douglas Whitmore would be willing to meet privately with Mr. William Carter that afternoon to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to their current disagreement, and that he believed a conversation between reasonable men could make tomorrow's proceedings unnecessary. William read it twice, then he handed it to Clara. Clara read it and handed it to Elias. Elias read it and set it on the table. "He's scared," Elias said. "He's being strategic," Clara said. "He wants to settle before Haskell's documents become part of a public court record." "Both things can be true," William said. He looked at the letter on the table. "I'm going to meet him." "Papa," Clara said. "I'm going to meet him," William said again in the tone that meant the decision was made. "Because I want to look Douglas Whitmore in the face, and I want him to look at me. I want him to see the man whose land he tried to take and whose daughter he tried to use as a bargaining instrument, and I want him to understand that it didn't work." He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "Elias comes with me." Elias looked at him. "You're not going to argue about that one," William said. "No, sir," Elias said. "I wasn't planning to." They met Douglas Whitmore at the hotel across the street at 4 o'clock. He had taken the best parlor room, which said something, and he was already seated when they came in, which said something else. A man who arrives first and sits down is a man who wants to control the geometry of the conversation. Gerald Crane was in the corner with a notepad. Whitmore was bigger in person than William had imagined from what Nathan looked like. He had the kind of physical authority that comes from decades of being the largest presence in any room he entered, and he carried it with the ease of long practice. He looked at William when they came in, and then at Elias, and something moved briefly behind his eyes that might have been reassessment. "Mr. Carter," he said, "thank you for coming." "Mr. Whitmore," William said. He sat down across from him. Elias remained standing, which was his own choice, and William did not redirect it. "You wanted to talk. I think we can resolve this without the expense and disruption of a court proceeding," Whitmore said. He had a smooth, reasonable voice, the voice of a man who had used reasonableness as a tool for a long time. "The survey claim my company filed represents a legitimate business interest. Your prior discovery claim represents a personal one. There is a way to accommodate both." "What way?" William said. "A partnership arrangement," Whitmore said. "The mining rights are jointly claimed. My company provides the capital and infrastructure to develop the site. Your prior discovery is acknowledged and compensated. You receive a percentage of the yield. The loan note is retired as part of the arrangement, and everyone benefits." He spread his hands in the gesture of a man offering something reasonable. "This is better for you than a legal fight you may not win." William looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Caleb Morrison's trading records riding toward town on a fast horse. He thought about Haskell's log sitting in Hatch's office. He thought about Judge Sauer saying good with the particular satisfaction of a man who had waited a long time to hear an interesting case. "Mr. Whitmore," William said, "I'm going to tell you something plainly, because I have been a plain man my whole life, and I am not going to change that now." He leaned forward slightly. "You bought my loan note to use it as a lever. You sent Gerald Crane to research survey records before you had any legal claim, which means you knew about that mining site through means that weren't legal. You paid my neighbor to provide you information about my property and my finances, and you sent men up a mountain to follow my daughter and a sick man through a mountain pass in winter." He paused. "That is not the behavior of a reasonable businessman who wants a mutually beneficial partnership. That is the behavior of a man who wanted to take something that wasn't his and nearly got away with it." The reasonable expression on Douglas Whitmore's face had not moved, but something behind it had. "The partnership offer is a fair one," Crane said from the corner. "The partnership offer," Elias said, speaking for the first time, "is a way to get partial ownership of a claim you have no legal right to by giving the impression of generosity." He looked at Whitmore, not Crane. "You don't get a percentage of that site. You don't get a courtesy settlement. You don't get anything except what the judge decides tomorrow, which based on the evidence currently in Cornelius Hatch's office is going to be considerably less than you're used to walking away with." Whitmore looked at Elias for a long moment. It was the look of a man recalibrating rapidly and without pleasure. "You're the mountain man," he said. "The one Nathan," he stopped. "The one Nathan tried to dismiss. Elias said. Yes, sir. That's me. Whitmore sat back. Something shifted in the room. The particular shift that happens when a negotiation passes the point where it can be redirected. He knew it. They all knew it. The note, Whitmore said. His voice was still controlled, but the reasonableness had gone out of it. The loan note is legally mine. That doesn't change regardless of what happens with the mining claim. No, William said. It doesn't. And I'll pay it. Every cent. On the original schedule with the original terms, because those are the terms I agreed to with the bank, and those are the terms that stand regardless of what you paid for it. He stood up. I'll have your money, Mr. Whitmore. All of it. And it will cost you considerably more than $240 in legal fees to have tried this. They left without shaking hands. Whitmore did not call after them. In the street outside, William stopped and put his hand against the wall of the hotel for a moment. Not from weakness, or not only from weakness. From the particular physical aftermath of controlled intensity, the way a man's body catches up with what he's been holding back. Elias was beside him in a second hand at his elbow, not making anything of it. That was well done, Elias said quietly. Don't tell me that yet, William said. Tell me tomorrow. Tomorrow arrived the way consequential days always do, at the same pace as every other day, which is the cruelest thing about them. 9 o'clock at Judge Sauer's courtroom, which was smaller than the weight of what was being decided inside it, with wooden benches that had held the outcomes of 100 lives and showed it in the grain. Caleb Morrison's records had arrived by rider at 7 in the morning. Morrison himself had not come. It was too far and too fast. But his log maintained in the meticulous hand of a man whose livelihood depended on accurate record-keeping showed clearly that Elias Walker had sold him 43 pelts from the Northeast High Country on the 14th of March, 1874, and that the transaction had been delayed by 3 days due to Morrison being unable to travel, which matched precisely the argument about payment that Elias had described. It was corroboration that was specific, detailed, and entirely independent. Hatch presented it without theater. He presented everything without theater. Haskell's documents, Morrison's records, Elias's original map, Clara's ledger from the site. He laid it all out with the patient precision of a man who trusted the evidence to speak for itself and didn't feel the need to dress it up. Gerald Crane challenged the Morrison records on the grounds of hearsay. Judge Sauer overruled him in 12 words and moved on. Crane challenged the prior discovery claim on the grounds that a single individual's undocumented activity 4 years prior was insufficient to establish legal precedent. Hatch noted that the activity was now documented, corroborated, and filed under Territorial Statute Section 14, which Crane knew as well as he did. Sauer looked at Crane over his spectacles. Mr. Crane, your client filed a survey claim on land where prior discovery has been established by your own state statute. The only question before me is whether the documentation is sufficient. I am satisfied that it is. He looked down at his papers. The Whitmore Land Company survey claim is denied. The prior discovery claim of Elias Walker, filed on behalf of the Carter family, is recorded as valid. He looked up. As for the conduct documented in the Haskell materials, I am referring those to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for review. That is not my proceeding today, but it will be someone's proceeding. He closed the file. It was over in 40 minutes. They walked out of the courthouse into cold morning air that felt for the first time in weeks like it was on their side. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth briefly, not from distress but from the particular physical response of relief that has been held too long. Then she straightened and looked at her father and said, "It's done. It's done," William said. He sounded tired. He sounded more tired than Clara had heard him sound in weeks, and she understood that the effort of the last several days had been sustained by something beyond ordinary endurance, and that now that the necessity had lifted, the cost of it was coming in. "We're going home," she said. "Yes," he said. "We're going home." Elias handled the horses and the arrangements and the logistics of departure with the quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and he did it without being asked, which had stopped feeling like a thing worth noting and had started feeling like the texture of how things simply were. Clara watched him move across the livery yard and thought about what her mother used to say, that a man's character wasn't visible in the large things he chose to do, but in the small things he did without choosing, because they were simply part of him. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's judgment, and both of them were satisfied. The ride home was slower than the ride to town. Nobody pushed the pace. William rode between Clara and Elias without comment, and the three of them moved through the Colorado morning in a companionable quiet that had nothing empty in it. Somewhere in the middle miles, Clara looked over and saw that her father had his face tilted slightly upward, eyes half closed, and for a terrifying instant she thought he had gone wrong somewhere inside. Then she saw the expression on his face and understood he was simply, for the first time in months, not bracing himself against anything. He looked peaceful. He looked for a moment like the man he had been before Margaret died, and the cough started, and the weight of it all got too heavy to hold without it showing. She looked at Elias. He had seen it too. He met her eyes briefly and said nothing, which was exactly right. When they rode onto the Carter Ranch property, William stopped his horse at the gate. He sat there for a moment looking at the place he had spent his adult life on, the land his father had broken, and he had kept, and that was still his. Still entirely his. Then he rode through the gate, and Elias leaned down from his horse and latched it behind them, and that gesture, that small, ordinary domestic gesture of a man closing the gate on what had been kept, sat in Clara's chest like a warm stone all the way to the barn. That evening, after the horses were tended and a fire was going, and William had eaten more than he had eaten in days, and gone to bed earlier than usual without argument, which told Clara his body was finally overriding his stubbornness. She sat on the porch with Elias in the cold quiet of the Colorado night. They sat without speaking for a while, which was its own form of conversation between two people who had learned each other's silences. Then Elias said, "I want to talk to you about the mining site." Clara looked at him. "The yield when it's developed will be significant," he said. "Hatch will help structure the legal arrangement. But I want you to understand something before any of that moves forward." He looked at his hands for a moment. "That claim is filed in both our names, mine and your father's. I put his name on the filing because it was his land and his family this was for." He looked at her. "But it should be yours. When the time comes, when the arrangement is structured, the yield should be the Carter Ranch's, not mine." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Elias," she said. "I'm not saying that to be noble," he said, and there was a slight dry edge to his voice that she had come to recognize and like. "I'm saying it because I came here to be part of this family, not to bring a dowry and call it even. Those are different things." "They are," she agreed. She looked at him. "And I'm not going to argue with you about the structure of it because Hatch will work all of that out, and it will probably not look exactly like either of us is picturing right now." She paused. "But I want you to understand something in return." He waited. "When you rode up to this ranch," she said, "I watched you from the window. I watched my father look at you like he was trying to find the flaw in you, the way he always did with the men who came. And I watched you look back at him without flinching, and I thought, there it is. That's the thing I've been waiting to see. Not money, not charm, not a speech about what you'd provide." She looked at him steadily. "Just a man who could look my father in the eye and not blink." Elias looked at her. The lamplight from inside was falling through the window across the porch, and it caught the line of his jaw, the steadiness in his face. "Clara," he said, "when I rode up to this gate, I had rehearsed what I was going to say to your father about 100 times. And I lost every word of it the second I saw him standing there with that axe." The corner of his mouth moved. "Everything I said was improvised." Clara laughed, a real laugh, the unguarded kind. "I know," she said. "I could tell." "Could you?" "The part about your hands," she said. "I have my hands, I have my word. Nobody rehearses that. That's a man saying the truest thing he knows because everything else fell out of his head." Elias looked at her for a long moment. "Was that the moment?" he said. "When you decided?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "The moment was the cow. Dolly." She looked at the barn. "I was watching from the window." You didn't know I was there. You were crouched down with her in the cold, talking to her like she was a person who needed to hear something kind. Like it mattered whether she was afraid or not. She shook her head slightly. A man who does that when no one is watching, that's the man I want. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's a good cow. She's 16 years old, and she's difficult," Clara said. "Well," Elias said, "I have a type." Clara looked at him. He looked back at her, and the laugh that came out of both of them at the same time, quiet and real in the cold night air, was the kind of laugh that belongs to two people who have been through something together and come out the other side of it as something more than they were when they started. Inside the house, they could hear William coughing. Not the bad kind, the manageable kind, the kind that happened and then stopped. Clara's head turned toward the sound automatically, the reflex of years of listening for it. "I'll check on him," Elias said, already rising. "Sit down," Clara said. "He would hate that." Elias sat back down. "Right." They listened until the coughing stopped. Then the house was quiet again, and they sat with it. "He's going to fight this thing," Clara said, not asking, stating, "Whatever it takes, he's going to fight it." "I know," Elias said. "He's a stubborn man." "The most stubborn man alive," she said. She looked at the door. "But he's not going to fight it alone. That's the difference now." She glanced at Elias. "That's what changed." "Yes," Elias said. "That's what changed." "What?" 3 weeks later, Cornelius Hatch negotiated the formal development arrangement for the mining claim with a Denver-based mining concern that had been looking for exactly this kind of established prior claim site. The terms were generous, more generous than any of them had expected, because Hatch was a man who knew the value of what he was negotiating and did not accept the first number anyone offered. The yield from the first development phase alone exceeded the note value by a factor of 6, and the ongoing partnership arrangement would provide a reliable income stream for years. William paid off the loan note on a Tuesday morning. He paid it in full in person at the bank to Roy Hendricks, who received the payment with the particular expression of a man who has done something he is not proud of and is relieved to have the evidence of it retired. William shook his hand without comment and walked out. On the courthouse steps, he stopped and stood in the winter sun for a moment, with his face tilted up toward it, eyes closed, and Elias stood beside him and waited. $240, William said. "Gone," Elias said. 22 years, William said. "That's how long I've had this place free and clear. And then one bad spring, and a man I trusted." He shook his head slightly. "It's free and clear again," Elias said. William opened his eyes. "Yes," he said. "It is." He looked at Elias. "Because of you." "Because of all three of us," Elias said. "Don't give me more than my share of it." William looked at him for a moment with the expression that Clara called his settling look, the one he got when something had come to rest inside him that had been moving for a while. "All right," he said. "All three of us." He started down the steps. "Come on. Clara's making supper, and she doesn't like it when we're late." The wedding was in February, when the snow was still on the ground, but the worst of the winter had turned. They held it at the ranch in the front room with the furniture moved back to the walls and Dr. Briggs standing up as a witness, because he had been there at the beginning of all of it in a way, and it seemed right. The circuit preacher came on his scheduled route and performed the ceremony with the business-like warmth of a man who had married 100 couples and never got tired of what it meant. Clara wore her mother's dress, let out slightly at the shoulders, which fit her the way things fit when they were always meant for you. William stood beside her and gave her hand to Elias Walker's hand, and he held on for one extra second before he let go. Just 1 second, the weight of everything unsaid in it, and then he released her. Elias looked at his bride. Clara looked at her husband. The preacher said the words, and they said their words back, and it was not a large ceremony, and it was not an expensive one, and there were no guests from the wealthy families of Colton's Creek. There were neighbors who had stood by them through the winter. There was Mrs. Garfield from the boarding house who had brought a pie. There was Aldous Prim, the land office clerk, who appeared at the door somewhat diffidently, and was welcomed in, and who cried quietly during the vows in a way that surprised everyone, including himself. Harold Haskell stood in the back. He had come without being invited, and he had knocked at the door with his hat in his hands and asked if he might be permitted to witness it, and William had looked at him for a long moment and then stepped back from the doorway to let him through. They had not spoken much since the morning in Hatch's office. They were not what they had been. But Haskell had done the right thing when it had cost him most to do it, and there was something in that William couldn't dismiss, and so he had let him in, and that was the beginning of the long, slow, different thing they would build from what remained. After the ceremony, when the neighbors were eating Mrs. Garfield's pie, and the front room had the warm noise of people who had survived something together, William stepped outside onto the porch. The cold hit him clean, and he breathed it in carefully, the way Briggs had taught him, slowly all the way down and hold it and let it go. He heard the door behind him. "You'll catch your death," Clara said. "I've been catching my death all winter," William said. "I reckon I can stand 5 minutes." She came and stood beside him. She was still in her mother's dress with a coat thrown over it against the cold, and she looked like Margaret and also entirely herself, which was the thing that had always been true and that he had not found the right moment to tell her. He told her now. "You look like your mother," he said. "And nothing like her, both at the same time. I don't know how you do it." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder briefly. "She would have loved him," she said. "She would have—" William agreed. "She would have been insufferable about it. She would have told me she knew from the first 5 minutes, and I should have listened to her." "She would have been right," Clara said. "She usually was," William said. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, in the cold quiet of the February evening, with the warmth of the house at their backs and the wide dark of the ranch ahead of them. Then the door opened, and Elias Walker came out and stood on the other side of William, and the three of them stood together on the porch of the Carter Ranch, and nobody said anything for a while, because nothing needed to be said. After a while, Elias put his hand briefly on William's shoulder, just a touch light, and certain the way you touch something you intend to take care of, and William felt it settle through him like warmth. "Thank you," Elias said, quietly. "Just that." "For what?" William said. "For the 40 days, Elias said. "For the chance you gave me." William thought about a cold October morning and a man on an old horse with worn boots and a small bag containing everything he owned, who had looked him in the eye without flinching and said, "I have my hands. I have my word." He thought about a sick man's stubbornness and a daughter's courage, and a mountain pass in winter and a county land office clerk who had cried at a wedding. He thought about Margaret, who had always said the measure of a man is not what he carries in. It's what he builds while he's here. "Don't thank me," William Carter said. "You earned every day of it." He coughed once, controlled it, straightened up. The stars were coming out above the Colorado Territory, cold and bright and indifferent and magnificent. The same stars that had been there before any of them, and would be there long after. And below them, the Carter Ranch sat on its 700 acres of hard-won ground intact, paid clear and no longer standing alone against whatever came next. Inside, someone laughed. One of the neighbors, probably over pie, and the sound came through the window, warm and ordinary, the sound of a house that was lived in and full. Elias held the door open. Clara went in first. William followed, and the door closed behind them, and the porch was empty, and the ranch was quiet under the winter stars, and what had been built here through stubbornness and loyalty, and the kind of love that isn't announced but simply demonstrated day after day in cold barns and hard trails, and the willingness to stand beside someone when standing costs something. What had been built here was not a fortune and not a legend. It was a family, and a family, when it is the right one, is the one thing in this world that money was never able to buy and never will be. A poor man came to that gate with nothing but himself, and what he left behind was everything. That is the only kind of wealth that lasts.